That woman by the window, that's my mother. She's from Ohio. Small town, small life. We brought her here. Well, had to put her somewhere. She's my main charitable project. Howard Finch laughed, quietly, contentedly, the laugh of a man who had never had to earn anything with his own hands. That's touching, Richard. Exactly. We've provided her a dignified old age so she can just rest, not embarrass us with her provincial habits at our events. You know how it is. Like taking in a Labrador from the shelter. Feed it, walk it once a week, everyone's happy. I was standing 2 steps away, by the window, holding a glass of champagne I hadn't touched. Dom Perignon, 1998. Richard always knew the price of good wine. Pity he never learned the price of people. 200 guests around us, crystal, white tablecloths, the smell of expensive perfume, and even more expensive promises. The annual Hargreave Foundation Gala. Together we change the world. That's what the banner said at the entrance, in large gold letters. I turned slowly. Richard saw my face, looked at me for a second. Something passed through his eyes. Not shame, no. Something smaller. The mild discomfort of a draft from an open window. Howard Finch was glancing back and forth between us, his smile slightly less certain than before. Richard, darling, I'm touched. Since I'm your project, I ought to live up to the standards of a great philanthropist. It's my duty. Mom, don't. Don't what? He didn't answer. He didn't yet know what, exactly, he meant by that. My name is Dorothy Hargreave. I'm 68 years old. For 37 years, I taught literature at a school in a small town in Ohio. I raised Richard alone. His father died when the boy was 9. I used to read my 8th grader's Jonathan Swift, A Modest Proposal, 1729, the finest satire in the history of English literature. The author suggested eating the children of the poor as a solution to hunger in Ireland. The children didn't understand at first. Then they did. My son never understood it either. In 21 days, the conference room of Hargreave and Partners on the 22nd floor will serve breakfast to 112 people without permanent housing. Hot food, coffee, and programs, on the cover of which is Richard's official headshot with the caption, "Breakfast with a Philanthropist, a personal initiative of Richard Hargreave." His idea. He just doesn't know it yet. Mom, wait. I was already walking toward the exit. The cab smelled of pine air freshener and someone else's fast food. I sat in the back and looked at the city sliding past the window. Glass towers, lights, the lake somewhere far to the right. Chicago at night looks like someone spilled a jar of coins across black velvet. Richard loved to say that. He said it at dinner parties, and people nodded appreciatively. He'd heard it from me. I said it first, 20 years ago, when we drove through the city on a road trip and he was sitting in the back seat eating a gas station sandwich. He was 22. Still laughed at my jokes then. I watched the lights and thought, Labrador. Not with pain. Pain had already passed somewhere between the ballroom and the lobby, between the elevator and the revolving door. Now there was something else, something that felt oddly like clarity, like when you've been trying to read in bad light for a long time and someone finally turns on the lamp. Everything is the same. You just see it differently. The driver glanced at me in the mirror. You okay back there, ma'am? Perfectly fine. Thank you for asking. He nodded and looked back at the road. I appreciated that he didn't say anything else. I thought about the Labrador. It's a good metaphor, actually. Labradors are loyal. Labradors don't complain. Labradors are grateful for whatever you give them and never ask for more. A Labrador won't call you out in front of your partners, won't remind you whose kitchen table you did your homework at every night for 12 years, won't mention who worked double shifts at parent-teacher conferences so you could go to the summer math program in Columbus that cost $400. $400 that in 1993 felt like the moon. A Labrador is the perfect family member for a man who doesn't want family, just the appearance of one. The cab stopped at the building. I paid, got out, and stood for a moment on the sidewalk. 68 years old, in a dress that cost me $230 and which Melissa had called sweet when she saw it, with that particular intonation that means the opposite of what it says. The light was on in my apartment, 3rd floor, 2nd window from the left. I hadn't left it on. Claire Stone was sitting at my kitchen table drinking tea from my second best mug, the one with the faded blue stripe, and reading a paperback she'd taken from my shelf without asking. She'd been doing this for 11 years, ever since we met at a neighborhood association meeting where we were the only 2 people who showed up. We'd gone for coffee afterward and talked for 4 hours. That was it. She looked up when I came in. She had the particular skill of people who've spent decades in newsrooms. She read faces the way other people read headlines. Fast, accurate, no unnecessary commentary. She put the book face down on the table. That bad? I set my purse on the counter, took off my heels, stood in my stockings on the kitchen floor, and felt the familiar coolness of the tile. He called me his Labrador. Claire was quiet for a moment. His what? His charitable project, his Labrador from the shelter. Fed, walked once a week, everyone's happy, in front of Howard Finch and whoever else was standing nearby. He didn't know I was 2 steps away. Another silence. Claire wrapped both hands around her mug. Did he see you hear it? He saw me turn around. I smiled and told him I was touched and that I intended to live up to the standards of a great philanthropist. And what did he say? Mom, don't. Don't what? He didn't specify. Claire looked at me for a long moment. Something moved in her expression. Not pity, I was grateful for that. Something more like recognition. She'd had her own version of this years ago with a husband who'd introduced her at his company party as my wife. She used to work in journalism. Used to, as if it were a phase, as if 32 years at a newspaper were something you outgrew, like a bad haircut. She'd divorced him 14 months later. Dottie, what are you going to do? I sat down across from her, pulled her mug toward me, took a sip of her tea. Earl Grey, too strong, the way she always made it. I've been thinking about Swift. Jonathan Swift. A modest proposal. The best way to critique a system is to accept its rules and take them to their logical conclusion. Don't fight the metaphor, become it. But become it so completely, so literally, so enthusiastically that the metaphor destroys itself. Claire was quiet. She had the journalist's other great skill, knowing when not to talk. He said I'm his charitable project. Fine. I'll be the best charitable project this city has ever seen. I'll be so charitable it makes the 6 o'clock news. Claire picked up her mug, took a slow sip. You know, I still have friends at the Tribune. I looked at her. I know. I'm just mentioning it. I heard you. We sat in the kitchen for another hour. She told me about her garden. The tomatoes were coming in late this year, too much rain in June. I told her about the book I was reading, a biography of Eleanor Roosevelt that I'd been meaning to finish for 3 weeks. We didn't talk about Richard again, but before she left, at the door, with her jacket half on and the paperback tucked under her arm, she paused. Smart dogs, Labradors. Smarter than their owners think. She nodded once and went down the stairs. I locked the door and stood in the hallway for a moment in the quiet. Then I went to find a notepad. 2 years ago, when Richard suggested I move to Chicago, I thought it was love. He called on a Sunday in March. I remember because I was in the garden pulling up last year's dead tomato plants, and I had dirt on my hands when I answered. He said, "Mom, we worry about you alone in that house. Melissa and I have been talking. We want you closer. There's a nice building 3 blocks from the office. Quiet, doorman, good light. We'll help with the move." I stood in the garden with dirt on my hands and felt something warm spread through my chest. My son worrying about me. My son wanting me close. My son who called once a month and visited at Christmas, who had built a life so large and polished that I sometimes felt I was looking at him through glass. My son wanted me near. I sold the house in 6 weeks. 41 years in that house. John and I had bought it the year after we married. Richard had learned to ride a bike in the driveway. I'd planted the rose bush by the front steps when he started kindergarten, and it was still blooming, dark red, every June without fail. I sold the house and moved into the apartment on Lakeview and thought, this is a new chapter. The first red flag came 3 weeks in. We were at dinner, a business dinner, Richard's partners and their wives, a restaurant where the menu had no prices on the side they handed me. I was telling a story, something about a student I'd had years ago, a boy named Marcus who'd been completely lost in English class until we read To Kill a Mockingbird, and something clicked for him. He'd gone on to become a public defender. I thought it was a good story. I thought people might find it interesting. Richard touched my arm. "Mom, this isn't really the setting for school stories." I stopped mid-sentence, looked at him. He was smiling at the table, that particular smile, social, sealed, performs warmth without containing it. I finished my water, ordered dessert, talked about the weather for the rest of the evening. In the cab home, I told myself, he was nervous, business dinner, high stakes. I understand. I understood. I was very good at understanding. The second flag came 6 weeks after that. I came to Richard's office one afternoon. I'd been walking nearby, had bought a book at the bookstore on Michigan Avenue, thought I'd stop in and say hello. The receptionist at the front desk called up. A pause, another pause, then, "Mrs. Hargreave, Richard says he's very sorry. He's in a meeting. He also asked me to let you know that in the future, for security reasons, visitors should call ahead." I was his mother. There were no security reasons. "Of course. Please tell him I understand." I went home and made myself lunch and read 40 pages of my book and didn't think about it. I was very good at not thinking about things. The third flag I actually wrote down. Not as a flag, just as a note to myself, the way I used to note things when I was teaching, observations, things to come back to. Melissa had been redecorating the apartment, their apartment, 3 floors above mine in the same building. She'd asked if I had any pieces I wasn't using. I said she was welcome to look. She came down one afternoon and moved through my rooms with the particular efficiency of a woman who has already decided what she wants before she looks. She took the side table from the hallway, a small cherry wood piece that had been my mother's. She took 2 lamps. She took the framed print from above the desk, a botanical illustration I'd had for 20 years, because it worked so much better in their palette, while wrapping the print in a cloth she'd brought. "You don't really need it down here, Dottie. Your space is so cozy as it is." Cozy. The word people use when they mean small. Of course, take whatever you like. After she left, I stood in the hallway and looked at the lighter rectangle on the wall where the print had hung. I got out my notepad. I wrote, side table, moms, lamps, both, botanical print, cozy. I looked at what I'd written, then I added one more line, pay attention. I started paying attention. It's a strange thing. Once you decide to really look, you can't stop seeing. The world doesn't change, your eyes do. And then you can't go back to the comfortable blur. The dinner invitations started coming with conditions. Richard would call on a Thursday. Mom, we're having people over Saturday. Finch, the Caldwells, the new guy from the London office. It would be great if you came. And then, a beat later, casual, almost as an afterthought, let's keep it light, okay? These are business relationships. Maybe hold off on the teaching stories. Light. As if 37 years of life were a bag you could check at the door. I came. I kept it light. I ate food I didn't taste and asked questions I already knew the answers to and smiled until my face felt like a mask I'd borrowed from someone else. The Caldwell's wife, Patrice, cornered me by the bar at one of these dinners. She was on her third glass of wine and had the loosened honesty of someone who'd stopped performing 20 minutes ago. How are you settling in, Dorothy? Must be quite a change from Ohio. It's a wonderful city. I'm still discovering it. Richard talks about you, you know, at these things. He always says, she's adjusting. She's getting used to the pace. It takes time. She looked at me with something careful in her eyes. I wasn't sure if it was sympathy or a warning. Does he? You seem very capable to me. That's all. She refilled her glass and drifted away. I stood with my tonic water and thought about the word adjusting. As if I were a thermostat. As if I were the thing in the room that needed calibrating. Then came the Forbes interview. I found it by accident. Claire had left a copy on my kitchen table with a Post-it that said only page 47 and a small arrow. I made tea, sat down, turned to page 47. The headline? Richard Hargreave, Building a Legacy One Grant at a Time. Full-page photo, Richard in a pale blue shirt, the lake behind him. Very good photo. He photographed well, always had, even as a child. I read the whole thing. At the end, the journalist asked, "Who inspires you?" Richard's answer took a paragraph and a half. His early mentors, his business school professor, Dr. Alan Whitfield, who taught him to think in systems. His partner, Howard Finch, who showed him that real philanthropy is infrastructure, not sentiment. His wife, Melissa, whose clarity of vision keeps me grounded. End of paragraph. I read it twice in case I'd missed something. I had not missed anything. I set the magazine down, drank my tea. The tea had gone lukewarm. Outside, someone on the street was laughing at something. That particular loose laugh of a Thursday afternoon. I picked up my notepad. I wrote, Forbes, September issue. Who inspires you? Dr. Whitfield, Howard Finch, Melissa. Period. Then I underlined period twice. Then I called Claire. Did you see it? I saw it. You still have friends at the Tribune? Dorothy, I'm not asking you to do anything. I just want to know if the option exists. A long pause. The option exists. Good. I'll let you know if I need it. I hung up, made fresh tea, sat back down at the table. I picked up a new page in the notepad and wrote at the top, "Modest proposal." Then I started to write. The wine was the first thing I noticed. Not because I was looking for it. I wasn't, not then. I'd come upstairs to return a casserole dish I'd borrowed and let myself in with the spare key Melissa had given me for emergencies. They weren't home. I left the dish on the kitchen counter and was on my way out when I saw the cabinet. Richard had converted the pantry off the kitchen into a proper wine storage, temperature-controlled, cedar shelves, small brass lock that was not actually locked. The door was ajar. I opened it the rest of the way and stood there looking. 12 bottles on the top shelf, heavy glass, dark green. The labels handwritten in the old style. Chateau Margaux, 1945. I knew what that meant. John had been a modest wine enthusiast. Modest meaning he read about it more than he drank it because we couldn't afford the drinking. He'd once spent an entire Sunday afternoon telling me about the 1945 Bordeaux vintage, the summer that ended the war, the grapes that grew in that particular light, that particular relief. He said a bottle from that year had sold at auction for $31,000. I'd laughed. He'd said completely seriously, "Dottie, some things hold value precisely because no one was paying attention to them at the time." I stood in the cedar-smelling dark and looked at the 12 bottles. Then I closed the door carefully, made sure it was ajar exactly as I'd found it, and went back downstairs. I added to my notes, "Top shelf pantry, Margaux 45, 12 bottles, 31,000 each, total $372,000, not locked." Then I wrote, "Richard always says at his events, sharing is the highest value." Then, Chekhov's gun, I underlined it. The photography session was the one that nearly broke me. Not nearly. It did break something. Something small and specific that I hadn't known was still intact until it wasn't. A profile piece, long form, for a magazine that specialized in what they called the architecture of modern generosity. A photographer named Stefan, very young, very serious, with equipment that cost more than my first car. They were going to shoot the apartment, Richard and Melissa at home, the private face of a public benefactor. Richard called me the evening before. "Mom, tomorrow the photographer is coming at 10. "I know, you mentioned." "The thing is, the piece is about our home, our space, and we were thinking it would be cleaner if you weren't around while they're shooting." Cleaner. I filed that word carefully. "Of course. I'll spend the morning at Claire's." "Great. Thanks, Mom. You're the best." I went to Claire's at 9:45. She had coffee ready and didn't say anything about why I'd come. We sat on her porch and I read and she watered her tomatoes, and the morning passed the way mornings do when you're being careful not to feel too much of them. At noon, I walked home, came up the back way along the alley. Through the kitchen window, I could see Stefan adjusting a light stand in the living room. Richard stood near the bookshelf, my books, a full wall of them, the ones that had traveled with me from Ohio, in a pale cashmere sweater, looking thoughtful for the camera. Melissa was on the couch, in the spot I usually sat in. The room looked beautiful. It was my room, my books, my rug, my grandmother's clock on the mantel, staged as their intimacy, their warmth, their private life. I went around to the front entrance, took the elevator, let myself into my apartment on the 3rd floor, and sat in the chair by the window. Outside, Chicago was doing what it always does, moving, indifferent, enormous. I sat very still. Then I took out my notepad. I had 3 pages of notes by then. The Forbes quote, the wine, the dinner conditions, Patrice Caldwell's careful look, the side table that used to be my mother's, the botanical print, the word cozy. I turned to a fresh page and wrote at the top, "What does Richard actually need? Not what does he want, what does he need? The deep structural need, the one that drives all of it. The image, the architecture of it. He needed to look generous while controlling everything. He needed the appearance of warmth without the inconvenience of actual warmth. He needed a mother he could point to, my main charitable project, without a mother who talked back, took up space, told school stories at business dinners, reminded people that he'd been 9 years old once and afraid of thunderstorms. He needed a prop, a living prop. I wrote, give him exactly what he wants, generously, enthusiastically, all the way to the edge and then 2 steps past it. I wrote, he says he's a philanthropist. Fine. Let's find out how philanthropic he really is. I underlined that twice. Then I called the shelter on West Madison. Her name was Karen Oates. She ran the intake desk at the Madison Street Community Center, had been doing it for 11 years, and had the particular manner of someone who had processed an enormous amount of human suffering and decided the best response was to be aggressively competent and occasionally very funny. We met for coffee at a diner 3 blocks from the shelter. She was 40-something, red hair going gray, a coffee the size of a small bucket. I explained what I wanted, not all of it, just the shape of it. A breakfast event from the Hargreave Foundation, 100 people, ideally more. Good food, not institutional, real food. Eggs, toast, orange juice, coffee. A proper room. We usually work with corporate sponsors through their foundations. Is this an official Hargreave event? It's a personal initiative of Richard Hargreave. I'm his mother. I'm coordinating it on his behalf. She looked at me for a moment. Journalists, social workers, experienced kindergarten teachers, they all have the same look. The look that says, I'm deciding how much of this is true. He knows you're here? He expressed a commitment to personal charitable engagement. I'm helping him fulfill that commitment. A pause. Ma'am, how many people did you say? 100, but I'd like to plan for 120 to be safe. And the location? The conference room of Hargreave and Partners, 22nd floor, 8 in the morning, Thursday week. She put her coffee down. That's a very nice conference room. He's a very generous man. Another pause. Then Karen picked up her pen. Okay, then. She started writing. The office manager's name was Pam. I knew this because I'd met her twice at building events, and she had the specific friendliness of someone who genuinely liked her job and assumed everyone else was also trying their best. I called on a Monday. Pam, hello. This is Dorothy Hargreave, Richard's mother. I'm helping coordinate a charitable event for the foundation. Richard asked me to handle the logistics. You know how busy he is. Of course, Mrs. Hargreave. What do you need? The large conference room, Thursday week, 8 in the morning through noon. It's a breakfast event. External guests, around 120. Could you block it? A brief pause. Keyboard sounds. That's open. Should I put it under the foundation or the office? Foundation, please. Personal initiative. Hargreave Community Breakfast. That's what Richard wanted on the calendar. Done. Is there anything else he needs? A catering setup. Eggs, toast, juice, coffee. Institutional quantity. Karen Oates at the Madison Street Center will be coordinating the guest side. She may call to confirm. I'll look out for her call. This is wonderful, Mrs. Hargreave. We've been hoping Mr. Hargreave would do more of this kind of thing in person. He's very committed. He just doesn't always say so. I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat at my kitchen table and looked at my notepad. Venue booked. Guests 112 confirmed. Karen was working on 8 more. Catering handled. Calendar blocked under Richard's name. 1 item remaining. I turned to the page where I had written Chekhov's gun. Richard liked to say, at panels, in interviews, in the particular voice he used when he wanted to sound thoughtful, that great philanthropy was not about writing checks. It was about sharing what you actually valued. Your time, your access, the things you held close. He had said this, in those exact words, in an interview with a podcast about impact investing. I had listened to the podcast while walking along the lake one October morning, with the wind coming off the water and the leaves turning. I had thought, that's a beautiful thing to say. I had been proud of him. Now I thought, let's test it. The Murphys lived on the floor above Richard. Patrick Murphy, an electrician. His wife, Denise, an elementary school teacher. 3 kids, 7, 11, and 14. Good people. The specific goodness of people who have not spent any time thinking about whether they are good because they've been too busy just being it. I knocked on their door on a Wednesday evening. Patrick answered. He was still in his work clothes. Good evening, Patrick. I'm Dorothy from the 3rd floor, Richard's mother. I'm passing along a gift from him. He wanted to share something from his collection. He always says sharing is the highest value. Patrick looked at the bottles. His face went through several expressions in quick succession. What are these? Chateau Margaux, 1945. Richard wanted the neighbors to have them. 1945. A very good year. The summer the war ended. The grapes grew in a particular light that season. My husband used to say some things hold value precisely because no one was paying attention to them at the time. Patrick stared at the bottles, then at me, then at the bottles again. Mrs. Hargreave, one of these is worth more than my truck. Richard would say a truck is just transportation, but a good wine is a shared experience. I held the bottles out. After a moment, Patrick took them. He looked slightly dazed. Denise is never going to believe this. Enjoy them. Tell Richard I said hello. I went back downstairs, into my apartment, sat at the kitchen table. I'd taken 2, 10 remained. Richard had a dinner party on Saturday. I checked his calendar, Melissa shared it with me, so we can coordinate, and had not apparently considered that this meant I could see everything on it. Saturday, Howard Finch, the Caldwells, 2 names I didn't recognize, 8 o'clock. I wrote in my notepad, Saturday, 6:30 p.m., visit the Garcias on 4, the Winns on 6, the building super. Then I counted. 10 bottles at $31,000 each. I wrote the number, looked at it for a while. Then I moved on to the programs. Claire's friend at a print shop owed her a favor, something from years ago involving a city council story that Claire had buried in exchange for something she'd never fully explained. The programs were ready in 48 hours. Folded card, good stock, not cheap. On the front, Richard's official photo, the one from the foundation website. Dark suit, lake behind him, the look of a man who has considered suffering deeply and found it inspiring. Beneath the photo, Breakfast with a Philanthropist, a personal initiative of Richard Hargreave. Hargreave and Partners, 22nd floor. Inside, a short quote. I'd taken it from the podcast interview, verbatim. Great philanthropy is not about writing checks. It's about sharing what you actually value, your time, your access, the things you hold close. Richard Hargreave. Claire proofread it twice. He actually said this? Word for word. October last year. Impact and Legacy Podcast, episode 31. 47 minutes in. She set the proof down. Dottie, I want you to know that I am fully supportive of whatever you're doing, and I'm also slightly terrified of you. That's a very reasonable response. She laughed, a real one, the kind that surprised her. I hadn't heard her laugh like that in a while. It felt good. It felt like something returning. Do you want me to call Marcus at the Tribune now or after? After. Definitely after. I want him to find it himself. It's better journalism that way. You've thought about this a lot. I've had good teachers, 37 years of them. Richard called on Tuesday. I was making breakfast. Toast, soft-boiled egg, the newspaper I still got delivered in print because I liked the specific weight of it in my hands. I let it ring twice, then answered. Good morning, Richard. Mom, Pam mentioned a calendar block for Thursday week, a breakfast. Yes, I'm so glad she told you. I wanted it to be a surprise, but I suppose these things get around in an office. What kind of breakfast? A community breakfast, in the conference room. From your foundation, your personal initiative, as I told Pam. 120 guests from the Madison Street Shelter and 2 partner organizations. Karen Oates is coordinating on their side. She's wonderful. I've already confirmed the catering. Silence. Mom, what have you done? I've organized a charitable breakfast in your name. You said at the gala, I'm your main charitable project. I thought, what would he do if he were more personally engaged? And then I thought, he'd do exactly this. A real connection, not a check. Your time, your space, the things you hold close. That's a quote, by the way, yours from October. More silence, a longer one. Now the word came out with actual feeling behind it. Mom, Jesus. There's one more thing. I borrowed a few bottles from your wine cabinet for the neighbors, Patrick Murphy and a few others. You always say sharing is... How many bottles? 8. I'll return the remaining 4 if you'd like, or we could open one at the breakfast. I think the guests would appreciate, do not touch the wine cabinet. Richard, you have a dinner party Saturday. I assumed you'd want it gone by then anyway, given that it's, well, evidence of a certain level of spending that complicates the philanthropist narrative. I was actually helping. A very long silence. Call it off. I can't. It's confirmed with the shelter, the catering company, and your office calendar. Canceling now would be quite embarrassing, given that Karen has already told her clients that Richard Hargreave personally invited them for breakfast. It was on their board's newsletter, actually. They're very excited. How is this? How did you? You don't even have authority to. Pam didn't ask for written authorization. I'm your mother, and you told Howard Finch that I'm your main project, so I'm projecting, very enthusiastically. She heard him breathe. What do you want, Mom? She thought about this. The real answer was complicated and would take more than a phone call, and maybe more than either of them had left in them. But there was a simpler answer, a true one. I want you to show up Thursday morning, 8 o'clock, in a good suit, and I want you to have breakfast with Frank Delgado, who has been sleeping outside for 22 years and reads everything he can get his hands on, and Margaret Osei, who taught second grade in Evanston for 16 years, before things went wrong for her. I want you to talk to them, not perform talking to them. Actually talk to them. That's what I want. Silence. If I do, then we can discuss what happens to the 4 remaining bottles. She heard him breathe again. You're unbelievable. I know. It's a family trait. 8 o'clock. Don't be late. She hung up first. Thursday came in cold and bright, the kind of Chicago morning that apologizes for nothing. I arrived at 7:30. Pam had the room unlocked, and the catering team was already setting up. Long tables, white paper cloths, the particular organized chaos of large-scale feeding. The smell of eggs and coffee filled the 22nd floor, which normally smelled of recycled air and the quiet anxiety of money. Karen came at 7:45 with the first van, then the second. People filed in with the specific, contained dignity of those who have learned to be careful with spaces that don't belong to them. They moved carefully, spoke quietly, found seats. I stood at the door and handed out programs. Margaret Osei took hers, looked at the photo on the front, looked at me. Is this really his event? It is. He'll be here at 8. She looked at the quote inside, read it slowly. The things you hold close. He means it. He just sometimes forgets that he means it. She looked at me for a moment with the particular look of a woman who has taught 2nd grade and therefore understands everything about the distance between what people say and what they do. You his mother? I am. I see. She found a seat near the window. I watched her go. Richard arrived at 8:03, dark suit as instructed. He came through the glass doors and stopped. The conference room, his conference room, where he closed deals, where he sat at the head of the table and people deferred to him, was full of strangers eating eggs. Programs with his face on the table. The smell of institutional coffee mixing with expensive air conditioning. Howard Finch came in behind him, early for a 9 o'clock meeting, wrong floor, and stopped in the doorway. Stared. Richard. What is... It's a breakfast. A community breakfast. In the conference room? Apparently. He looked at me across the room. I smiled. The same smile from the gala, the one that meant, I'm touched. He held my gaze for a long moment. Then something moved in his face, something I hadn't seen in a long time, something that didn't belong to board meetings or gala dinners, something younger, something that remembered a kitchen table in Ohio, homework, a woman who read him Kipling on sick days and drove 4 hours each way to see him play in the state math competition because he'd asked her not to make a big deal of it, and she'd made exactly the right-sized deal. He straightened his jacket, walked into the room. I watched him go to the nearest table and sit down across from a man with a gray beard and 3 sweaters who was eating toast with focused appreciation. I'm Richard. I understand this is my event. The man looked up. I'm Frank. You got any more of this orange juice? It's real juice. You can tell. I'll find out. He flagged down a catering staffer, asked about the orange juice. I turned away. Outside the glass wall of the conference room, Chicago moved and glittered and didn't care about any of us at all, which is the most honest thing a city can do. The Tribune piece ran the following Monday. I don't know for certain how Marcus found it. Claire maintained, with great serenity, that she'd simply mentioned to him that interesting things sometimes happened on the 22nd floor of financial buildings in the Loop. Marcus was a good journalist. Good journalists find their own way in. The headline was, Old School Philanthropy. Hargreave Foundation brings breakfast and boardroom to cities homeless. Not a front page story. Page 3 of the Metro section. But with a photo. Someone at the breakfast had taken it, one of the guests, and sent it to the paper apparently, of Richard sitting across from Frank Delgado, both of them looking at something Frank was showing him on a folded piece of paper. Richard leaning forward slightly, jacket off, actually listening. It was a genuinely good photograph. Underneath, Richard was quoted. I don't know when they caught him, probably coming out of the building. Marcus had always been good at the doorstep. The quote was, "My mother has been pushing me toward this kind of direct engagement for a long time. She was right. I should have listened sooner." I read this on my kitchen table at 7 in the morning with my first cup of coffee. I read it 3 times. Then I called Claire. I saw it. He said I was right. He did. In the Tribune. In the Tribune. Page 3. A long silence. Claire, he said I was right in a newspaper. He did, Dottie. I sat with that for a moment. Outside, the city was starting. Traffic sounds, someone's radio, the lake somewhere behind everything, like a held breath. I need to think about the wine. The 4 remaining bottles? He didn't cancel the breakfast. He showed up. He sat with Frank for 40 minutes. I timed it. He got Frank's email address. Frank told me afterward that Richard had said he might be able to connect him with a legal aid organization about some paperwork. That's actually something. It's a small something, but it's a real one. She thought about this. I'm not giving the bottles back. Obviously not. But I've decided I'm not distributing the remaining 4 either. Also reasonable. I'm going to tell him where they are and let him decide what to do with them. He knows the neighbors have 8. He knows what I think sharing means. What he does next is his business. That's very measured of you. I'm a measured woman. You organized a breakfast for 112 homeless people in your son's conference room. I'm a measured woman with a very clear sense of proportion. She heard Claire laugh again, the real laugh, the returned thing. Richard called that evening, not a text, an actual call. He let it ring twice on his end. I could tell, the way the connection has a particular quality when someone has picked up but not yet spoken. Hi, Mom. Richard. A pause. The breakfast. I wanted to say, Frank is. He stopped, started again. He's been reading the same book for 2 years because he can't always keep track of it. The same book. He told me the whole plot twice while we were talking, and it didn't matter because the second time was just as good as the first. Dorothy was quiet. I gave him a library card. I don't know why I'd never thought of... He stopped. Because you weren't in the room with him. Yeah. Silence. The good kind, not the weighted kind that had been sitting between them for 2 years. The kind that comes from not knowing how to stop performing long enough to actually say something. This one was lighter. The Tribune piece. I saw it. I meant it, what I said. I know. Mom, the wine. The Murphys seemed to enjoy it very much. Patrick said Denise cried a little, in a good way. How much is left? 4 bottles, still on the shelf. I didn't touch them after our conversation. Okay. Okay? I'm going to call the Murphys and the Garcias and whoever else you gave them to, and I'm going to ask to come over and open them together. Is that... He trailed off. She waited. Is that the right answer? Dorothy looked out the window. The lake was out there somewhere behind the buildings and the lights and the enormous, ordinary life of the city. It's a start. Okay, a start. Come for dinner Sunday. I'll make the chicken. The one with the lemon? Is there another kind? A pause. I missed that chicken. I know. Sunday, 6 o'clock. Don't be late. She hung up and sat for a moment in the quiet apartment. The light through the window was evening light, the long gold kind that doesn't last, the kind that makes everything look slightly more like itself than it actually is. She picked up the notepad, looked at the pages of it, the side table, the Forbes quote, Chekhov's gun underlined twice, the wine, the programs. She turned to the last page, wrote, Frank Delgado, library card. Same book, twice as good the second time. Then she closed the notepad. Outside, Chicago moved and moved and moved, patient and enormous and completely indifferent, the way only very large things can afford to be. She thought, that's all right. She thought, I've been here before. She got up and started on the chicken.